few minutes. Andrew Winstanley is at the scene. I guess I can call you an old hand, Andy, because you've actually flown the bird.
Well, I have, yeah, but first of all I'll tell you that we've heard that the pilot has just requested to start his engines. That actually means that they will probably pull back from the stand in probably 5 minutes time, maybe airborne in about half an hour. I can tell you what those passengers are feeling at the moment, be a sense of exhilaration. I suppose you've heard all the legend. You know, will it be something different to an ordinary plane? Certainly on takeoff it is. It's just incredibly quick. It takes off at about 255 miles an hour. Now that's about a third quicker than any normal plane, and also it's just so incredibly noisy. Now, one man who has flown Concorde 4 times is Gary Clark. I think he doesn't mind us calling him an enthusiast. Gary, what is it about Concorde that, you know, really gets you going?
I think the greatest thing about Concorde is that when it was built or first flew in 1969, it was the leading edge of technology, and today it still is the leading edge of technology. And we're retiring it with nothing to replace it. Just very briefly, how sad are you going to be when this flies over? I'm desperately sad. Tonight is the last time, I believe, that we'll see reheats over the sky of London, the fire coming from the engines. I think it's a very sad day for us all. A lot of emotion around, I think. Gary, I know you want to get back to the perimeter, so thanks very much indeed. Emily, with that, that's back to you, and we're going to be watching the skies.
Shame it's not taking off quite on time. I guess it's fair to say if you were flying it for the very last time, you'd want to make that moment last a little bit longer too. 15 lucky winners of the BBC London Concorde competition have a place in that grandstand at Heathrow to watch Concorde coming into land tomorrow, the end of its last flight ever from all corners of the world. But that is about it from us tonight. Andy and Vince from Eurasia, Danny Baker's guests on our breakfast on 94.9 FM from 6 tomorrow, and of course
will also land. One is on its way from Edinburgh. The other has completed a supersonic flight over the Bay of Biscay. Well, it may not have been the most comfortable way to fly. It's noisy and rather cramped, and certainly it wasn't the cheapest way to get from A to B. But was there ever a more beautiful, stylish, head-turning, breathtaking aircraft? Somehow it still stands for cutting-edge modernity, even though the design is over 40 years old. Well, for the next hour, we'll follow the path of these Concordes as they reach their final resting place just behind me. And you can see Alpha Charlie there behind me. That came in from Wales last night and is now parked on the apron. We've also been given exclusive access to the control room as air traffic control guide the flights in. We're among the crowds who've gathered in a specially built grandstand here at Heathrow Airport. And for those who work in the maintenance area, this will be a bittersweet day. We'll be talking to those who've nurtured Concorde for so many years. And just to give you as much of the plane's final approach as is possible, we're live in the skies over London with a bird's eye view. You can see Big Ben down there in the late autumn sunshine, and that helicopter will be following Concorde in. But before all of that, let's see how Concorde is doing on its flight from New York. It left about just under 3 hours ago now, and we can cross live exclusively to the air control tower and join Fergus Walsh. Fergus.
Well, John, we've got a fantastic position up here. I've just heard the 3 Concorde pilots, because there are 3 of them in the air now, all talking to each other up here in the air traffic control tower, where they're going to be guiding those last supersonic flights in. And on the map behind me, I can tell you the progress of the JFK Concorde. We think, we're going to confirm this in a minute or two, it's just about to reach the North Devon coast, cross land there, then it'll swing up past Bristol and Filton, where of course the Concordes were made, swoop down past Swindon, then hook up with the Bay of Biscay Concorde, and then with the Edinburgh Concorde, and the 3 of them will fly one after the other along the Thames, landing in about 20 minutes' time. Well, here in the control tower is Adrian Dolan, who's an air traffic controller, and he's going to speak now to the chief flight engineer, Robert Woodcock, on that JFK Concorde. Adrian.
Speedbird Concorde 2, Heathrow.
Heathrow Radio, Speedbird Concorde 2. Go ahead.
Speedbird Concorde 2, very good afternoon. Report your position and level, please.
Good afternoon to you. Speedbird Concorde 002 was over Combe Martin at Devon, in North Devon there at 3-1. and we've just gone over the surface beach of Williku. Flight level is 350. We're in subsonic cruise now at a Mach number of Mach decimal 95, and that's given us a ground speed of 580 miles an hour, which is still about 100 miles an hour faster than the subsonic jets are going at the moment.
Speedbird Concorde 2, Roger. Report the conditions of your flight over the Atlantic today.
The conditions over the Atlantic has been normal for Concorde, perfect, almost. Concorde flies at an altitude between 50 and 60,000 feet, and we're out of the jet streams, which are the high-level winds, and we're above any cloud formation. So there's been nil turbulence. It's been a very, very comfortable and enjoyable flight for everybody.
Speedbird 2, Roger. We noted your 3-minute late departure from John F. Kennedy Airport. Do you envisage still be on time to join us in London on schedule?
That's affirmative. We're estimating Ockham now at 1448.
Roger. And what kind of send-off did you receive from air traffic control at Kennedy in New York?
Generally, it was a magnificent send-off from everybody at John F. Kennedy. The airwaves were jammed, I tell you. It's also a very, very sad day for our staff there, who won't be seeing this magnificent airplane again. When we departed Kennedy, there must have been about 100 vehicles in the sort of semi-darkness of early dawn there, and fire trucks were in attendance spraying red, white and blue sprays just before us there, with the flags of the United States and the United Kingdom out of both windows. So it really was a sight to behold. The airfield practically came to halt. Everybody wanted to wait to see us off, and there were 6 helicopters actually photographing us as we departed the airfield at Kennedy.
Speedbird 2, Roger. We'll call you back in about 10 minutes.
In 10 minutes, Speedbird Concorde 2.
Adrian, thanks very much. Well, there you have it from the horse's mouth, as it were, that JFK Concorde making good progress. It's now flying at about 37,000 feet, so if you are on the flight path, you should be able to look up, cloud permitting, and see the contrails as it flies west to east, and of course get a much better view over London. The 3 Concordes are going to land on the northern runway behind me, one after the other, and then they're all going to line up, drop their noses, and all of the pilots are going to poke a Union flag out. So it'll be quite a significant moment there. John.
Fergus, thank you very much indeed. And was it my imagination, or did I just detect a flicker of emotion in the voice of the first officer there on board Concorde as they're coming in over Devon now? Well, he was talking about what it was like to leave New York early this morning. We can cross live now to JFK Airport, and our correspondent Stephen Evans, who saw the Concorde 002 off. Steve, it was quite some departure, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, there was a flicker of emotion. There was a lot of sadness here. The plane was parked just in that space there at 7 o'clock this morning. Right through the night, people had been coming to the windows here, pressing their faces up against those windows and just gazing at this beautiful, great feat of engineering. Then just after 7 o'clock this morning, people were coming underneath, stewardesses with those turned up boater hats were standing underneath it and being photographed. Then we had the final event. The plane was pushed back by the truck. It moved back out into the runway. The captain put out the Union flag and the Stars and Stripes out of the cockpit window. It stood there gracefully, elegantly. 2 fire trucks put an arch of red, white and blue water for the plane to go through, and it went through with the utmost grace towards the runway. It paused on the end of the runway, as one imagines it should do with its grandeur. Then it built up speed, 250 miles an hour, and simply soared into this absolutely pristine blue sky. Towards Manhattan, it banked away and then out over to the great blue yonder of the Atlantic, and this absolutely fabulous sky, this morning sky in Manhattan.
And Steve, do we know who's on board?
We know some of the celebrities. Sir David Frost, who seems to be one of their best customers, Jeremy Clarkson, an absolute clutch of supermodels. We know what they ate. They had lobster fish cakes. They had a selection of champagnes, not just one champagne. And I suppose perhaps the biggest celebrity of all, Joan Collins, was there. So it was a pretty good clutch of celebrities. I suppose it wasn't like the great days when Paul McCartney was known to actually lead the people in the cabin in singing Beatles songs, or Rupert Murdoch or whatever. but not bad going, you know.
Okay, Steve Evans, thank you very much there in New York as Concorde left this morning with the fire trucks seeing her off, and it really was a spectacular sight. Well, here at Heathrow Airport, crowds have been gathering throughout the day to get their own view of Concorde as it comes into land. And they've even built special grandstands here at Heathrow Airport so that people can get a good view of the planes as they come in. Catherine Marsden is with some of those people. Catherine.
Yes, so you can see behind me just some of the 1,000 people that have been lucky enough to get tickets to be on this grandstand. And to give you an idea of the view that they're looking out of, we're just going to swing the camera around. From the level that we're at, you can't really see very much, but that is the perimeter fence. You can see lots of people lined up along the road as well. That's the perimeter fence of Heathrow, and the runway is just the other side. So Concorde is going to land right in front of all of us. And of course, if you're up there in the grandstand, you're going to have a much, much better view. Everybody here is a Concorde enthusiast. We've got two of them with us here this afternoon, Melanie Rolfe and Jordan Williams. Thank you both for joining us. Melanie, you've got your own Concorde story to tell. Let's hear it.
I flew on Concorde in 1994. Complete surprise from my husband. I just thought I was going to go and touch it at an air show in Fairfield, and then he handed me a ticket, said you're going on it, and he just says, the expression on my face, he'll never forget it. So, and it was great fun.
You're really only one of a very small number of people around the world lucky enough to have been on Concorde. What's it like being on board?
You just get shivers. I'm telling you because I'm doing it now. Just exceptional feelings, you know. There's nothing else like this aeroplane, nothing else.
And Jordan, you live right under the flight path of Concorde, don't you? So you're very used to seeing it.
Yeah, it's quite loud in the mornings, but it's a brilliant sight.
So how do you both feel today? You're obviously here for the most important event of all. How do you feel? How do you think you'll feel when Concorde finally comes to land?
Very sad.
Why do you think you'll feel so sad?
Because it's part of Britain's heritage and we can't delete it.
What about you, Melanie?
Well, I've told my boss I'm coming to the funeral of a dear friend today. He understands what I'm really meaning, but you know, this is something we should be proud of, and it's a shame.
Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you both very much for talking to us. The excitement's been building here this afternoon. Of course, they've got less than 15 minutes now to wait.
Catherine, thanks very much indeed. It's been a very odd kind of day today because there has been the most tremendous excitement among everyone that you speak to, but it's also tinged with extreme sadness, and I suspect that nowhere will that sadness be more acute than, well, in the hall behind me here, the engineering base where the Concorde has been loved and nurtured and cared for and kept in the air. Let's cross now to Philippa Thomas. Philippa.
Thanks very much, and you're right, John. It's really awash with nostalgia down here. Everybody thinking that Concorde was dreamt up in the era of Harold Wilson and the Beatles. We talked about the white heat of technology, putting man on the moon, and flying at the very edge of space in this beautiful machine. Let's think about the future now. I'm joined by our transport correspondent. And Simon, is this it? Is it all really over now?
It's all over for Concorde as far as carrying passengers is concerned. I really don't think there's any chance now of any further passengers ever getting on Concorde again. The big question, though, is this really the end for Concorde flying at all? After this afternoon, they've got 7 Concordes that British Airways have got to get rid of. It's thought that they're all going to go to museums. But there is still an open question, and British Airways will only answer this next week, as to whether one, in fact, might well be kept for special occasions, Queen's birthdays and other such celebrations, and that perhaps we might still see a Concorde, albeit without passengers, but potentially still flying.
Well, Simon, stay with us, and of course we'll be here when everyone comes off onto the red carpet after that last flight in from New York.
Philippa, thank you. So what exactly is it like to travel at Mach 2? We set Dermot Murnaghan the arduous task, and believe me, it was really tough to find volunteers, of finding out what makes flying on Concorde such a unique experience. He found it started long before you board the plane.
I'd like to check in for New York, please. That might just be enough. So I've got my champagne and nibbles, but of course it wouldn't be a Concorde flight without a celeb or two. What is it that's so great about Concorde for you?
Well, the greatest thing for me is to be able to get from New York to London in a little over 3 hours. As long as you're not more than 6'1", I think it's a great place to be.
There is that space, isn't it?
Well, enough rubbing shoulders with the stars. Time now to get on board.
This is the EasyJet flight to Barcelona, is it?
Smiles all round for the passengers, and even hardened Concorde veterans still fall under its spell.
Yeah.
The ability to fly on the edge of space where the sky gets darker, where you can see the curvature of the Earth, travel faster than a rifle bullet, 23 miles a minute. This time of the year, take off from London in the dark and travel west so fast that you see the sun rising in the west.
Now the thing is, as they often tell you about Concorde, it actually is very cramped on board. Take away the leather seats, the fine wines and the great food, and you could be on a charter flight, I suppose.
So forget the frills and the glamour. The real reason why people are here is to say, I was there when we hit twice the speed of sound.
Here we go, Mach 2, 1,300 miles an hour, 50,000 feet above the Earth, and you don't feel a thing. To be honest, it was bumpier as we taxied out along the runway.
It's just the thrill, isn't it? You know, the speed it goes, it's absolutely terrific. And so smooth.
We leave at 6:30 and we're home at 5:30. It's fantastic. I'm at the house at 6:30 already.
Souvenir hunters are stripping these final flights of just about everything that isn't nailed down. And items in the Concorde catalogue are selling like hotcakes. But that's not all.
The brochure has turned up on an internet auction site and they're asking £65 for that. How weird is that?
What are they taking with them?
Anything from the safety cards, anything that says Concorde, your drip mats, your little swizzle stick for your drink that says Concorde on it. I believe one of these signs was taken, but how they got it, I do not know.
And here we are, New York, all too soon.
3.5 hours of life in a jet set, that's it. I'll never fly Concorde again. Well, no one will ever fly Concorde again. It's back to Earth with a bump.
And having become a member of the Supersonic Club, I left with a lump in my throat and wondering when us mere mortals will again have the chance to fly at twice the speed of sound.
It's hard to believe it's not going to fly again, isn't it? See ya. Dermot Manahan there with the Concorde experience. Well, I think this is going to be my only souvenir of the Concorde trip. Media only, my media pass for getting into Heathrow Airport today. Let's find out how the Concordes are doing on their path into Heathrow Airport. We can go back to Fergus. And Fergus, that extraordinary sort of access you're getting to the flight decks.
Yes, indeed, John. In about 3 minutes' time, a chap called Ivor Sims, an air traffic controller, is going to clear the first of those 3 Concordes to land. And spookily enough, curiously, he was the air traffic controller who back in 1976 cleared the first commercial Concorde flight for takeoff. Now, on the map behind me, I can tell you that a 002, the Concorde coming from JFK, is around about Ockham in the Surrey area here, and it should have hooked up by now with a flight from the Bay of Biscay, and then very shortly they'll be going round to start their descent across the Thames. But we can do better than that. We can talk to Concorde. We can talk to that JFK Concorde, because Adrian Dolan here is an air traffic controller, and he's been chatting already to Robert Woodcock, the chief engineer on board. Adrian.
Speedbird Concorde 2, Heathrow radar.
Heathrow radar, Speedbird Concorde 002, go.
Speedbird Concorde 2, once again report your position and level, please.
At the moment we're 23 miles from Ockham in Surrey, descending to a flight level of 80. Our speed at the moment is marked decimal 52, and we've got a ground speed of 450 miles an hour. We're estimating Ockham at 49.
Speedbird Concorde 2, Roger, and can you provide for us your routing after Ockham, please, towards landing at Heathrow 27 right?
Heathrow radio, Speedbird Concorde 002, we've just received a change of routing, and on approaching Ockham we're going to be vectored to the north now, over Heathrow itself, and I guess from Heathrow we'll be going over Hillingdon area, then we're going to turn due east and go over Southall, and east onwards over the northwestern and northeastern boroughs of London. We should be getting down to an altitude of about 2,500 feet then. When we turn base leg, it will be around the Thames Barrier region, and then we'll join the localizer for runway 27 right and head inbound towards that runway at London. Passing over Canary Wharf, we'll have the Dome on our left, so people around Greenwich will be able to see us, and I suppose there's a fair amount of people at the Greenwich Laboratory and Cuddy Sark area. They will be able to see us quite clearly. And then over the City of London, we'll have the London Eye on the left-hand side. We're passing almost overhead Buckingham Palace and the Mall, and then onwards to Heathrow from there.
Spirit Concorde 2, Roger. While we have this opportunity, can I wish you on behalf of all air traffic control all the best for your approach. It's been a pleasure to serve you over the last 30 years. When we come into work tomorrow, our jobs will have changed forever.
I should imagine they would, and that's very kind of you to say that, and may we, on behalf of all the crew here, and may I, thank you all for the magnificent service you've given us over the 27 years of Concorde operations into Heathrow. It's much appreciated, and we always like coming back to London here in the professional English voice.
Spirit 2, Roger.
As amendment to that, I can just give you the final times for the Concorde arrivals at Heathrow, and the first Concorde will land at 0503, that's 1503. Second Concorde's going to land at 1505 and a half, and us, finally, the Concorde 002 will land at 1508.
Roger.
Adrian, thanks very much indeed. So there you have it, the Concordes. The first one is the Edinburgh one's going to land at 3 minutes past the hour, then the one that did the Bay of Biscay loop at about 5 minutes past, and then that final flight from New York at 8 minutes past. And there's a great deal of sadness here today. I remember the one flight very well that I took on Concorde, and it will never again roar over my house. And it is really something, John, that you tell your grandchildren about, and I will always treasure that memory.
Okay, Fergus, thank you very much indeed, and absolutely fantastic to get that access to the flight decks and hear how the crews are doing on their way in. In fact, we can just show you, I think, the pictures over London now. We've got a helicopter up at about 2,500 feet, and that helicopter is waiting to get the first glimpses of Concorde coming in over London, as they were discussing from the flight deck there, the path they'll take over the Millennium Dome down towards the London Eye, and then in towards Heathrow Airport. And I think they've been given permission to come in slightly lower today than normal, because so that as many Londoners as possible get a chance to see the plane coming in. Let's just see if what we can... So let's go back to those helicopter shots and see if we can catch a glimpse yet of, I suspect, what will become a dot on the skyline, because obviously air traffic control, whilst happy to let us film these pictures, don't want us to be going too close to the path of the incoming plane there. But as I was saying, our helicopter, I think, is roughly at an altitude of 2,500 feet, and I think that's the altitude we expect the Concorde to make its final approach, which I think is slightly lower than it normally would do. But as if this is such a special day, I think it was agreed that the plane could come in slightly lower on its final approach into London. And you can see it's there we are, and there you can see it just in the centre of your screen. Concorde coming in over London. I think we're at sort of, this is the east end of London that the helicopter is, sort of on the Essex-Kent border, coming in now back towards the centre of the Thames, following the path of the River Thames. And it's a fantastic when you fly in over the centre of London, and you can see, you can pick out all the landmarks so clearly. I think we've lost Concorde behind some cloud cover. I think we'll stay with these pictures for a little longer just to see if she re-emerges from the clouds. But we have been blessed with a fine day, and that was the first. And we'll be coming back to those live shots, and there you can see London spread out before you. Now, in a few moments' time, I'll be introducing a couple of our studio guests this afternoon. First, let me take you back to March 1969 and Concorde's first ever test flight.
Rotate any second, nose wheel well up, smooth rotation continuing, nose come up to 20 degrees, she's airborne in 26 seconds. She flies, Concorde flies at last, climbing into a sunset sunlit sky pursued by...
Now, I don't know whether you recognise the voice of the person doing the commentary there, but it was of Raymond Baxter, of course, the voice of Tomorrow's World. And I'm delighted to say that he is one of our studio guests today, along with John Hutchinson, a former Concorde pilot. Raymond Baxter, first of all, coming to you. Was it a fantastic moment when you heard the thunderous roar of those engines and you saw it take off?
Oh yes, unforgettable experience. I've been a passionate advocate for Concorde ever since the project was first launched, and here was the realization of a dream. Any maiden flight is exciting, but the maiden flight in France and then at Filton, one was acutely aware of the historic significance of what we were watching in the conclusion of the long period of development flying before the first passenger was carried. Here was the dawn of a new era, and today, sadly, we are marking the end of that era. And I had to say there's more fuss today than there was on the first day of flight.
And John Hutchinson, if we look at it, you can see there Concorde making its progress towards London. So roughly what altitude would you say they're at there?
Well, it's difficult to say from those pictures, but I suspect you're right. I think they probably are getting clearance to fly in at a rather lower altitude than normal, so probably somewhere around 1,500 feet, I would guess at. And all I know is that that chap's going to be concentrating very hard on making a most immaculate approach and a most immaculate touchdown. We'll get our score charts out.
Yeah, how easy will it be for him to put out of his mind the emotion of the moment, the historical significance of the moment, and just be concentrating on, right, am I doing everything that I would always do in the run-up to a landing?
I can only compare it with my last flight on Concorde when I retired, and I just felt I did not want to walk away from that aeroplane, that lovely airplane that meant so much to me over 15 years, having done a sort of bit of a shot-down type of arrival. Unfortunately, I did a very smooth landing, and I'm sure that's the way all these three chaps will want to end their Concorde careers.
How difficult as a plane is it to land?
It's a very easy airplane to land. It's settled, that great delta wing compresses the air between the runway surface and the wing, and it sort of settles into that ground cushion effect. The trick is to actually land very smoothly.
Raymond Baxter, we talk about you, and you know, me growing up, I remember you, of course, as the Tomorrow's World presenter. What do you feel? It seems like we're going back to yesterday's world today, yes, by saying that the supersonic age has ended.
Well, yes, I share your emotions exactly. I think what we are seeing today is a national week. It's a cross between a celebration and mourning, and I am mourning in the sense of grief, you know what I mean. My hope, my profound hope, is that Concorde will be seen flying again. And quite frankly, I am not certain why she's being taken out of service. The aeroplane has operated impeccably all those years and is today, as we can see, operating impeccably, forecasting the arrival at the end of the runway to the nearest second. And I remember so clearly when it started, and there was a certain amount of suspense. Even though André Turcard, the French test pilot, and Brian Trubshaw had done it on the simulator, they could never be sure how it would actually handle.
And we're just getting these wonderful pictures there from the helicopter. And I think another Concorde was coming the other way, so I don't know whether they're on some kind of pattern of coming in sort of some kind of formation. But there's the very wide shot that we're showing you of the Concorde. Now we can go in tighter as the plane comes in, and these are photos of these pictures are coming to you live from our helicopter that we've put up over London to get these marvellous images of Concorde against a sort of autumn cloud cover that has, luckily, it's been cold on the ground today and a little windy, but it has been a very fine day with very good visibility, and that's why we're able to bring you these fabulous images. John Hutchinson, let me bring you in as well there, because I saw you were nodding vigorously to when Raymond Baxter was saying, this is a premature end.
I absolutely was nodding vigorously. I agree with that completely. The airplane should not, in my view, be ending its career today. It's got at least 8 or 10 years life left in it, and it just saddens me. I hope maybe a consortium, or Sir Richard Branson, or a consortium involving Sir Richard Branson, maybe we'll get together and enable one to fly on as a heritage airplane. That would be magnificent.
Now, the fact that the landing gear is already down, does that suggest that it is very close to landing?
That'll mean he's about 5 miles or so out from the runway threshold, roughly speaking.
Right. And so then a matter of minutes to go before it's due to touchdown?
Yep.
Let me just stay with you on the whole question of whether it is viable or non-viable. Isn't the problem that it was technologically spectacular, aesthetically wonderful, but commercially a disaster?
Well, people say it was commercially a disaster. I don't think it was. I think British Airways did extremely well with Concorde, bearing in mind that they acquired it from the British taxpayer at a knockdown price, whatever that may be. People have quoted a mythical £1 figure, but, you know, on that sort of basis, I believe that British Airways could hardly fail to make money with the airplane. In the years that I was on it, the break-even load factor was around 40%, and we used to get average load factors on the airplane of around 60%.
Okay, let's just keep you with these pictures here. And Raymond Baxter, did you actually get to fly? I mean, I know you were in Toulouse for the test flight. Did you fly Concorde?
Yes, I did. Thanks to my great friend Brian Trubshaw, the late Brian Trubshaw, and John Cochrane, who was co-pilot. I went on quite a few of the proving flights before passengers came aboard, and we did one of the early proving flights with passengers to Morocco, and everyone who was anyone in aviation was on that flight.
But explain to me this, why did no other airline buy Concorde? Why? We've seen the British, oh, look at that shot now, we've got Concordes there sort of stacking up.
Oh my goodness, look at that. Oh gracious. That's the kind of thing we never even saw at Farnborough. Yeah. I flew in Concorde over Farnborough, her one and only appearance there, with John Cochrane, and I'll never forget that. But to see two Concordes over Heathrow, I never, ever imagined I would see that. Did you, John?
No. It's a spectacular sight, isn't it? Stream landing, almost.
Yeah, and so wonderful for the thousands of people who've gone to enormous lengths to see this. I know of a very distinguished elderly lady.
I don't know whether we can come to the studio camera here, but you can see it now coming into land behind us. Right behind where we're speaking to you from now. And there we are, Concorde is coming in behind us, the first of the Concordes to land. And you can hear the roar. And you can actually, as I look around, you know, I can see a number of people, and everyone is standing absolutely still. Everyone is just looking to the sky to watch this Concorde come down on the northerly runway. John, what sort of speed is it doing now as it's coming into land?
He'll be doing roughly about 157 knots, something like that. And, oh, well, I think we'll say a little gust of wind caught him.
Was there a little bounce there, or was that my imagination?
No, it was a gust of wind.
You're being loyal. You're being loyal to your fellow fraternity of Concorde pilots.
Dear. You won't be pleased.
You won't be pleased?
Remember, this aeroplane lands and takes off a great deal faster than your average jumbo.
And the reverse thrust that you must need to get to break it, is that, do you feel that jolting?
There are two things about the deceleration of Concorde on landing. The reverse thrust is extraordinarily effective, and the carbon fibre wheel brakes, which have pioneered the wheel brakes for all the sort of modern Airbuses and so on, and all modern airplanes, are incredibly efficient in terms of absorbing energy. You can stop a Concorde. I've stopped one at Cardiff in about 4,000 feet of runway.
Yeah, and I mean, I can just see the next one coming in behind us now, which I suspect will be touching down in a couple of minutes' time. But you talk about that. We talk about the technological advances made by Concorde for Concorde, but presumably the technological advances had other spin-offs in other areas of life. And we can still, we've got another magnificent shot of one Concorde coming into land and another Concorde sort of stacking up behind it. There must have been other the technological advances, just like the moon landing, I don't know, gave us Teflon, for example. There must have been things associated with Concorde.
Oh, absolutely many. And not least the worldwide prestige which it won for British aviation, British engineering. And there's no doubt that the spin-off effect of Concorde are almost immeasurable. For instance, Airbus would not have been formed had it not been for the cooperation between England and France in the construction of this aeroplane. Another thing we haven't mentioned, which is unique, is the thrust of power when Concorde accelerates from the cruising speed of a normal jumbo to supersonic speed, and you literally go back in your seat like that.
There she comes.
But this, of course, is absolutely the reverse process.
Lovely. Such a gorgeous sight when she comes into land. She always reminds me of sort of swan touching down on a lake or something. It's such an elegant, long-necked, beautiful creature.
We haven't mentioned the drooped snoot, the famous drop nose, which makes it possible to take off and land this aeroplane, which has an attitude so different from any other airliner.
And the droop snoot, incidentally, is just so that the pilots can actually get a decent view of the runway. With the nose up, the poor old pilot coming into land would have his view of the runway totally obscured.
So it has to do it. In fact, I mean, I'll tell you what, I want to pause us slightly now, because what we're seeing now is flight 002, and this is going to be the final Concorde that people are going to see coming into land at Heathrow Airport. This is it. This is the end of the era. This is the final one that we're going to see in the skies, and I suspect he's got probably a minute and a half left before it comes onto the runway and then taxis round. I think it will almost do a lap of honour around the airport to come onto the stand. John, just tell me what you're thinking now.
I was actually thinking about the staff at Kennedy Airport, the British Airways staff, who will miss it madly. They were fantastic to us. In fact, the whole of the Port of New York Authority and the air traffic controllers at Kennedy Airport were treated Concorde with tremendous help and assistance and cooperation.
Tell me this, being a pilot on Concorde, were you treated as somehow something different? So a cut above the rest almost? I mean, or that maybe other pilots got a little chippiness, because to fly that beautiful thing.
It wasn't us that were a cut above the rest, it was that aeroplane that was a cut above the rest. We were all we were the privileged pilots and flight engineers who were allowed to operate that aeroplane.
And did you feel that? Look, here it comes now.
I certainly did feel that.
And down she comes.
Just settling down. Lovely.
Puff of smoke from the
Perfect.
wheels.
And then once that nose wheel touches down, that's when we bring in the reverse thrust and the carbon fibre brakes swing into action. Lovely sight. You can hear the reverse thrust coming through the studio.
So what is it? Sadness, a feeling of pride, sadness? What is the mixture of emotions, John Hutchinson?
Sadness for me, predominantly. But pride that the aeroplane has achieved so much in its commercial life, and it's demonstrated that supersonic flight is doable and that there are huge benefits to supersonic flight, and I'm sure there will be a successor to Concorde at some stage.
I had the misfortune of being the BBC's Paris correspondent when Concorde crashed, and I went out to Gonesse that evening. And there was a feeling then that would Concorde ever fly again? Did you think it was right to make all the investment in the aircraft to bring it back for what has been a relatively short period of time?
I'll tell you what I do think, very strongly indeed. I don't believe that British Airways should ever have grounded their Concordes.
And you can see, I think we can see the Union flag poking out of the window there.
Yes.
As possibly the most famous nose in the world. And just look at the people behind, the ground crew. They've probably all got other things they're meant to be getting on with. But the whole airport, I suspect, at Heathrow has come to a halt for these three Concordes.
Just to go back very briefly to what you were saying, if you cast your mind back, you'll remember that after that dreadful event at Paris, British Airways carried on operating their Concordes for about 3 weeks with a whole lot of very tight checks and procedures agreed with the Civil Aviation Authority. And it was eventually, I'm afraid, pressure mainly from France that it ended up with the grounding of the airplane, which I believe was completely unjustified and slurred the reputation of a magnificent airplane.
Now, how much do you think that you've touched on something, and this is a day of kind of, you know, let's talk about the reality of today as well. There has been something of a battle, hasn't there, between the French and the British over whether to keep Concorde going?
Yes, I think that's fair to say that, and I think part of it stems from the fact that there's much more in the way of business links between London and New York than there are between Paris and New York. So British Airways had a sort of commercial advantage over the French in that sense. Also, because London was crucially that much closer to New York, it wasn't such a tight operation from an operational point of view for British Airways as it was for Air France. So Air France did have problems that British Airways did not have. So basically British Airways were able to operate profitably in a way that Air France perhaps couldn't.
Okay. Look, let's go outside the studio, because there have been huge crowds that have been gathering to watch Concorde's return, and Catherine Marsden is with those crowds of people who've been in the grandstand, probably shivering cold, but hugely excited and maybe sad by what they've seen. Catherine.
Yes, it's been a long wait, and it is bitterly cold today, but I think everybody here thought it was well worth it. Extraordinary scenes amongst the crowds here as the three Concordes landed. We, of course, got an absolutely fantastic ringside view. Everybody was up on their feet, cheering and clapping, thoroughly enjoying at the moment. Two of those that have been in the crowd today and have very special reasons for feeling very sentimental are two ladies, Jean Mason and Andrea Pendleton. You were both Concorde air stewardesses, weren't you? How do you both feel today? Let's start with you, Jean. How do you feel seeing them?
I feel very, very excited and very sad, but it was very emotional. It was lovely. We're terribly lucky, and I feel terribly privileged of having actually worked on it.
You shed a tear watching them come in?
That was a bit dramatic, wasn't it? Yes, just a bit of a lump in my throat, yes, I must admit, yes.
You were both air stewardesses, weren't you?
We were. We joined in 1977 and left in 82, and so we flew a lot together, and we have such good memories. The roar of the crowd here, the enthusiasm of people has been absolutely brilliant.
What's it like working on board Concorde?
Very hectic, but lovely memories. Lots of people who really want to be on it, mostly. Lots of commuters wanting to save time, but just the excitement of being something special.
Jean, what are your fondest memories of working on board such a very special aircraft?
Oh gosh, you caught me out there. Really couldn't. I mean, my one memory, and I wouldn't say fondest memory, but I was talking about it today, was I was on a Concorde from New York. Perhaps I shouldn't say this now, but we had a bomb scare from New York. I'm being told to try and not let on to the passengers why the aircraft was sort of up to the sky, but it all turned out all right in the end. That's fine. But there's just too many errors. Just so exciting.
Were you expecting a fly past? I think a lot of people here are a bit disappointed.
Certainly, because when Captain Mike Bannister was a very junior pilot when we were flying, and it's nice to see him being interviewed, but we thought he might pull out something special for the last flight. But nevertheless, it's been absolutely marvellous. I wouldn't have missed it for anything. I'm so glad.
Just describe to me your feelings as you watch those final three planes.
Something in the stomach, the butterflies and everything, but it was just great to be here, really. It's such the most beautiful aeroplane, and wherever we've been with it, everybody just looks at it and so enthusiastic about it.
Andrew, why do you think, having met so many passengers on board Concorde as you've flown with it all these years, why do you think people are so fond of it?
Well, it's beautiful anyway. It's something to be very proud of, that we've achieved that, and nobody's done anything better since, and just part of history.
Part of history? That sounds terrible to say that.
Do you both feel part of history now when you realise?
I think we do. We're known as the Golden Oldies, and we're having a big reunion tonight with about 100 of our friends. Some of them we haven't seen for 20 years and plus.
So an emotional occasion all round. Well, ladies, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And those are views of everybody here. Everyone's been so excited. The flashbulbs have been going, and people have been thrilled to bits. And as I say, we've had a fantastic view right at the edge of the perimeter fence to see those final three Concordes landing right in front of us.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed. There's quite a long taxi back now to the stand here beneath me. Well, while Concorde does, I don't know, a sort of metaphorical lap of honour around Heathrow, here's David Shookman to look back at the plane's past.
Rotate any second, nose wheel well up, smooth rotation continuing.
1969 and the moment of truth. Will the futuristic technology actually work?
Will the Anglo-French partnership hold together? Will this beautiful vision make business sense?
She flies. Concorde flies at last.
From the very beginning, Concorde was something of a gamble. The science, brand new. The engineering, highly complicated. And the design, way ahead of its time.
Special computers will be installed. And as soon as Concorde goes supersonic, they'll start...
Concorde was also hugely expensive. In today's money, £11 billion. At one stage, the government, under Harold Wilson, tried to pull out, but couldn't.
We have reached agreement in principle on the Concorde aircraft.
So the project carried on. Jobs and pride were now at stake, and the political rhetoric gathered pace.
It's the biggest international project, air project ever undertaken. I mean, after the American space program and the Russian space program, this is probably the biggest of its kind in the world.
Concordes was soon dispatched all over the world, a massive sales drive. At one point, 70 of the planes were on order, but with the supersonic speed came the sonic boom, and country after country said no to allowing it in. To some, Concorde was nothing to be proud of, excessively noisy, and never likely to make any money. And with scenes like this, order book dwindled to zero.
Soon you'll be able to travel a mile every 3 seconds.
Eventually, British Airways and Air France were given the planes. The first BA flight to Bahrain, a grand occasion.
What are you planning to do when you get to Bahrain?
Enjoy myself.
How? The champagne flowed amid optimistic talk of a new era.
It's wonderful. Absolutely super. It's something I'd always dreamed about and never thought I'd do it at the age of 75, and I'm jolly proud to be British and feel we and the French have done it.
Concorde went on to become a symbol of glamour. In the end, there was only one destination, New York. And over the years, it did start to pay. Until this.
An Air France Concorde has crashed in Paris. Over 100 are dead.
Just over 3 years ago, disaster in Paris, a fire on takeoff. This Concorde on charter carrying German tourists. Nobody survived the crash. And though it was an accident caused by debris on the runway, the Concorde image was damaged. The planes did fly again after a costly refit, but terrorism and recession took their toll, and the flights became more and more expensive to operate. Concorde was always the ultimate aviation dream, never practical, but always inspiring. So although the fate of the last remaining planes is to end up in museums, their appeal is guaranteed. Long after today, Concorde's popularity will live on. David Shukman, BBC News.
Well, let's go now to the pictures live at Heathrow Airport as these 3 Concordes make their way slowly, elegantly, gently back to the stand here at the engineering base for Concorde planes. And, you know, like athletes when they've just won a race and they sort of take their tops off and they grab a flag and they run around the racetrack. Well, I think Concorde is doing something pretty similar here right now. You can see them just slowly in formation turning around the airport, and you can be absolutely sure that whatever airline people are working for today, and you can see the Union flag poking out of the window there as the noses droop down as it prepares to come in, that there are people lining the apron, waving, clapping, feeling a part of this day, a day of sort of extraordinary mixed emotions, I guess, of exhilaration and extreme kind of disappointment, sadness, depression, whatever, that the era of supersonic commercial travel has come to a close. And so you'll see the Concordes now just ever so slowly making their way across. And look at the crowds there, just everyone standing still. I'm sort of completely struck by it. And, you know, it's not just today. I mean, I remember kind of something as mundane as taking a car back to the hire car place, and suddenly everyone rushing out from, I don't know, the Hertz rent-a-car or Europe car, whatever, because Concorde was about to take off. Now it took off every day, but yet all the staff still wanted to see it. There is something that is, you know, that makes people stop what they're doing to look at Concorde. And this is the plane, as David Shukman was reporting there, that entered its first commercial service to Bahrain in 1976. So the novelty, you would have thought, would have ended, and yet it still goes on. Well, I'm joined in our studio now by the person who I guess has made the decision that it's time to end the era of supersonic flight, and that's British Airways Chief Executive Rod Eddington. Rod Eddington, we're looking at these pictures now. This must be a day of mixed emotion for you as well.
Indeed, and for everyone in the BA team. Sadness that we're retiring an icon in our flagship, celebration that she's carried 2.5 million customers over nearly 30 years and done so in enormous style.
I have to say, I've been here since this morning, and everyone I've spoken to has sort of said, was it really necessary? Did they really have to take this decision? Was this plane really past it?
Very tough decision, obviously, for all of us in BA, not just for me, but for the senior team who are involved in it. A mixture of economics and the realities of the world in which we live, and operating robustness. Concorde is a remarkable aeroplane, the oldest aeroplane in our fleet, although it doesn't look it still looks the most modern, such is its grace and elegance. And like all old aeroplanes, increasingly difficult and expensive to maintain.
Was there a hint of politics in it too, that maybe the French, after the tragedy at Gonesse, had lost the will to keep Concorde going? It was expensive, it was losing money, let's call it quits?
No, in a sense, without the French, we would never have got Concorde back into the air again in 2001. Remember, after that terrible, tragic crash in Paris in mid-2000, it was a joint effort by Airbus, by British Airways and Air France that actually got the aeroplane back into the air. Very much against the odds. A lot of people thought she would never fly again after that terrible tragedy.
Now, let's push on to the future. You've got 7 Concordes that are going to sit here. Is it absolutely 100% definite, certain, that they will never fly again?
I don't think any of us can say that with that amount of certainty. We're working very hard to see if it's possible to fly Concorde in a heritage role. It's never been done with an aeroplane of this complexity before. It's people trying to get a Vulcan bomber, which is a jet aeroplane too, back in a heritage mode. They've been trying for some time. We haven't ruled it out, but it's clear that it's extremely difficult.
But what about, I mean, I'm hearing all sorts of things today, and inevitably, on such a momentous day, there are going to be all sorts of rumours doing the rounds, but that there might be different consortia who would try to buy it and keep 1 or 2 of them flying commercially. Would you countenance that idea?
Well, it's clear that the aeroplane's not going to fly commercially again. It's clear to all of us. Airbus have made it very clear. We're clear that Concorde's sadly come to the end of what is a remarkable innings. But Airbus have made it very clear too, as the descendant manufacturers, that Concorde's type certificate was withdrawn at the end of this month, and it will no longer fly in a commercial sense. I think there is a chance it can fly in a heritage sense. It's an unlikely outcome, but it's something I think we'd all like to see. The real question is it possible?
And where will these Concordes be dispersed to now?
Well, the first and most important thing is that we get good geographic coverage here in the UK, and the majority of them will obviously stay in the UK. We want to be sure that wherever you live within the United Kingdom, you've got a chance to go and see one. So we're looking at museums around the country that not only want the aeroplane, because of course every museum wants the aeroplane, but is able to look after it appropriately and properly so that it will be still something to be viewed in a piece of great beauty in 30 or 40 years' time. But she is also...
But absolutely, certainly, it's not going to fly. You're not going to be taking fee-paying passengers again in any capacity.
That's clear. That's absolutely clear.
So it's a question of whether there's a minor heritage role for it to do air shows or, you know, fly past at big national occasions.
Precisely. And the question of which museums it goes to is also important. I mean, it is a global superstar, and you can say that of very few things. Usually it's people we think of in that context, but Concorde's a global superstar. And
well, let's look at this. What's happening here?
Yes, it's been given a traditional aviation guard of honour by the people in the fire services and the engineering folk here at Heathrow, as the 3 aeroplanes taxi around the perimeter of the airfield. We're hoping that they'll be able to stop in front of our operational centre, the Compass Centre, and salute the many men and women who've operated Concorde as cockpit crew and cabin crew before they finally come back to the hangar, where the aeroplanes can salute the engineering teams who've worked so hard to keep this aeroplane along.
Is it fair, when we look at these fabulous pictures, to say, look, Concorde has been the most spectacular technological achievement, but commercially it has been, you'd have to judge a dud. No other airlines board it apart from, you know, the originators, Air France and British Airways. It struggled for some time and now the plug has been pulled.
The aviation lover in me would resist that comment, but there is certainly a ring of truth in what you say. Concorde, any manufacturer will tell you that you have to sell between 400 and 500 aeroplanes of a particular type before you recover your development costs. Less than 20 Concordes were sold, so in pure economic terms, the construction program wasn't a success. That's absolutely clear.
And if you were to cite one reason for the failure, what was it? Was it oil prices in the 1970s, jealousy from the Americans? I mean, you weren't there. You're not burdened by the history of this. You're a relatively new chief executive.
I think there are a couple of things that probably contributed to that, and you've mentioned one of them. Concorde was thought about in the 50s, designed and built in the 60s. The first test flight was in the late 60s. Of course, the first oil shock was in the mid-70s, and fuel prices skyrocketed. Supersonic travel is a very thirsty piece of work, and therefore clearly the cost of fuel meant that Concorde's cost soared. The other thing I think was that when it was conceived, environmental issues didn't drive much of what happened in aviation. The sonic boom was never thought to be the sort of problem that it was clearly going to be when Concorde actually first entered commercial service in the mid-70s. So I think it was those two things more than anything that meant that about 20 were made, only a dozen or so sold, and we were well short of the 500.
Okay, Rod Ellington, Chief Executive of British Airways, thank you very much indeed for joining us on this particular day. Well, of course, one of the great advocates of supersonic travel was the Duke of Edinburgh. Now, he's been speaking to our court correspondent, Nicholas Richard.
Do you recall your first encounter with Concorde?
Yes, vaguely. I went to the place where it was being put together at Filton, originally to see it being assembled, and the first one was being built.
What was it, in your experience, either flying on it or piloting it, that made it so special?
No, I don't think there was anything special about it. I mean, it just got you there a lot quicker. I mean, it was dramatic how... of course, the windows were so small, you couldn't really, well, you could look out, but they were very thick. I mean, the view was very limited unless you were sitting up in front. And even then, there was not much to look at. It was just sky.
As a resident of Windsor, it's frequently flown over Windsor Castle. Has the noise been a nuisance?
Yes, it was very noisy. I think it would have been very different if all aircraft had been as noisy as that. You certainly wouldn't have tolerated it. But the fact that it happened once or twice a day, it really wasn't all that bad.
And of course you've witnessed Concorde on a number of flypasts, most memorably perhaps at the climax of the Golden Jubilee weekend.
Yeah, it's very impressive.
What do you remember of that occasion?
Concorde flying past. What else can you remember?
So how should one sum up Concorde?
I think a phenomenal technical achievement. I mean, when you think of the complications and the extent to which practically everything was novel about it, I mean, it was a remarkable achievement in the tradition of some of the really great engineering triumphs of people, engineers and designers in this country.
Your Royal Highness, thank you very much indeed.
The Duke of Edinburgh there with his own recollections of Concorde, and let me just bring you the pictures here that we have now as the Concorde make their way ever so slowly. I can imagine, often I would imagine pilots are in a great rush to get to their stand, and they just, you know, at the end of a flight, end of a long flight, they want to, you know, unwind and stop. And I suspect this is one of those moments where people just never want the moment to end. They want to drag this out for as long as is humanly possible, because they know that this is the last time they're probably going to sit in the at the cockpit in control of Concorde. And I should imagine it's just the same for the passengers, just the same for the stewardesses. There'll be no rush to leave the aircraft. That moment when you hear the engine shut down and you can take your seatbelts off and everyone goes rushing for their bags in the overhead compartment. I don't think anyone will be rushing today. I think they'll be taking their time and pausing. But these Concordes still have not reached the engineering base where we are now, and we're waiting for them to arrive. Everything is being got ready outside here, but these Concordes are still making their way slowly around the perimeter of the vast complex that is Heathrow Airport. Now, Rod Endington has gone, but we are rejoined by John Hutchinson, the former Concorde pilot, and by Jamie Bowden too, who is now an airline consultant, but you worked for many years for British Airways in their communications, telecommunications, and know Concorde inside out. Jamie, let me come to you first. So many people I've spoken to today have said, I'm going to struggle to keep a dry eye. Has it been like that for you?
Absolutely. I think along with most other people that have worked for BA over the past 26, 27 years, I worked for BA for nearly 22 years, and Concorde just becomes almost part of your everyday life, particularly if you work here at Heathrow. I've spoken to a lot of my colleagues who I've worked with over the years, over the past 2 or 3 days, and they've said that they find it not just a very emotive day, I think, but some of them said it's almost going to be an unbearable day for them, and I think Concorde has just symbolised not just that it's BA's flagship and has been for the last 27 years, but that she is a much, much loved head of the family.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because, you know, when you work for a big organisation, whether it's British Airways or even the BBC, dare I say, you know, employees tend to be kind of cynical and they hate the organisation and they moan about this and they moan about that. Are you really telling me that people weren't cynical about Concorde, or was Concorde different? Was there something, a sort of sprinkling of stardust, a bit of magic about it?
Yeah, I think that's a fair description. I think that if you look at people who have spent a lot of their working lives in BA, Concorde has been such a unique selling point for British Airways. Yes, of course, with Air France as well. But BA marketed Concorde very well over those years, and I think, as John said earlier, if you went back to the 80s, you saw that Concorde was really involved in most of BA's major promotions. Right up until 1997, if you remember, BA put on a competition where you could win a seat on Concorde for £10. And that was to celebrate the 10 years since privatisation in 1987. And that brings the whole of the airline together. If there has been one thing that has absolutely brought the whole of the airline and its 50,000 staff together over the past 27 years, it's this thing standing out there, it's Concorde.
Yeah, did it make you rethink marketing in a way? That it was somehow, you had to treat Concorde differently from other things, because there were the charter flights, there were the special kind of little tours around the Bay of Biscay flights. It was somehow done differently than you do normal commercial aircraft.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at commercial airlines in the world today, 400 or 500 major airlines spread throughout the world, there were only ever 2 airlines that flew Concorde. So there were only ever going to be 2 airlines that could use Concorde, not just as a flagship, but its chief marketing tool. And one of the things that I think British Airways did well was to use Concorde really for either prestigious promotions or for key anniversaries. So, for example, Concorde, over the past 2 or 3 years, was there for the state opening of Parliament, royal anniversaries.
And there we can see just these exclusive helicopter shots that the BBC have got with this, the bird in the eye. Look at that fabulous view of the Concourse as they slowly taxi round. John, you know this airport. You've parked the Great White Bird before. Whereabouts are we now in the airport? Can you get a sense of where we are?
I haven't got a clue.
I've so often wanted to say that when I've been asked a question on television. You know, when I've been asked to speculate about something where you've got no reason for knowing. And I've never dared say I haven't got a clue, but good answer.
I think, to be honest, they're just the other side. They're the north side of this hangar that we're sort of looking at here.
Right, so they're seconds away from us. You're going to promise me that, John?
Well, my friend Jamie here and I agree. We're going to share responsibility for this.
Yeah, you can see this is the main hangar. You can see on the screen there, there's the main hangar behind, and the 3 aircraft are coming behind this hangar that's right next to us now. So it's only a few minutes away.
See it now, the hangar behind, yeah.
And I suppose it must be rather strange for the other pilots who are just operating normally today and have got their flight schedules, and they're kind of knowing, looking out the window, I would imagine, as Concorde is making its way round. And, you know, having to concentrate on their own job of taking off and going off to whatever destinations they're off to.
And there are probably lots of them sitting there wishing that they'd had the opportunity to fly Concorde, or even fly in Concorde. And now they'll never be able to do that.
Yes, I don't know whether I'm allowed to say this, but Rod Eddington just told me a fabulous story, because I said to him that I've never flown Concorde. And he said, well, my marriage was nearly on the rocks, unless though I had to spend £4,000 of my own money to get my wife a ticket so that she could go on one of the last flights. and he thought that his marriage wouldn't survive unless he got his wife onto Concorde. But even the chief executive of British Airways had to pull the stops out at the very last minute to get a flight for Mrs. Eddington.
Well, good
and here
for him.
Yeah, and here we can see that's our lovely shot again from the helicopter. I don't know where the third one's gone.
No, I don't know where the third one
I
is.
think the third one's a bit of a way behind.
And taxiing at the speed they're taxiing at, you'd have thought the third one would have had plenty of opportunity to catch up.
Okay, well, let's get someone else's recollection of Concorde. We can hear from Richard Branson. He's the owner of BA's chief rival, Virgin Atlantic, of course, and he's determined to keep Concorde flying. Somehow, he wants to buy them. He's offered a £1 coin. He told us how seeing Concorde as a young man inspired him to get involved in the airline industry.
I think my first memory of Concorde was I was driving down the motorway and she flew across the motorway and I ended up crossing 3 lanes. I was so excited seeing her crossing. Fortunately survived the experience, but she's just absolutely and utterly magnificent, and ever since then, despite her carrying British Airways on its tailplane, I've looked up in awe in awe at it in the sky. The whole fact that Britain built and conceived this wonderful aeroplane, massive technological achievement, inspired a whole generation, and I was one of those who were inspired by Concorde and ended up running Virgin Atlantic. Well, you know, whether I would have run it if Concorde hadn't existed, I don't know, but it was just a great inspiration. I would love to see Concorde continue to fly, and I think that most people believe that Concorde should continue to fly. It has another 25 years of good flying life left in it. It's the greatest ambassador for Britain that there is. And you know, what absolutely baffles me is that the British government has not got involved to try to keep it flying. I mean, it's, you know, what we're going to be doing is saying farewell to Britain's greatest ambassador, and yet they've taken no interest in it whatsoever.
Richard Branson there, and we're back in the studio. We're waiting for the Concordes to come round. Those 2 Concordes that we've been showing you a little earlier that are sort of right behind each other, one of those is the Biscay flight, the other is the Edinburgh flight, and they are doing a lap of honour. They're doing a tour of the airport, going to all those far-flung corners that perhaps they don't often get to see, to wave their goodbyes to Heathrow. And the New York flight, I'm told, is being towed now round to where we are, and we should be seeing that very slowly, very shortly. And so we'll get the New York flight in first, and that is being towed round. And as soon as that Holmes interview, we'll bring you the pictures of that. And that is why there's a slight delay. And so these 2 are going on. These 2 are kind of just having a little tour, a pleasure ride round Heathrow Airport, while the New York flight is brought in to the hangar here, where our studio has been built for this special occasion. John Hutchinson and Jamie, let me just get your thoughts on what Richard Branson was saying about perhaps buying Concorde and keeping it flying. Was that a I mean, Jamie, you know the way the world of the press works, and you know how Richard Branson operates, and he's a very successful businessman. Was that a good way of getting publicity, knowing it was frankly impossible that British Airways was going to sell?
I think deep down, my own personal view is that deep down, Richard Branson probably knew right from the word go, from when British Airways decided to retire the fleet, that he was not going to use them to remount a commercial scheduled service. I would imagine that, as he has said today, that he is looking at possibility of the heritage flight. My own personal view, once again, is that as BA have invested over £1 billion in Concorde in the last 28 years, if anybody is going to put up one of those flights, either for heritage purposes or for fly past or for air shows, then I think BA should be the first airline to have that crack. I must admit, I think that Sir Richard has galvanised a lot of public opinion to try and get a heritage flight, but as you heard Rod Eddington say just a few minutes ago, he hasn't completely ruled it out just yet.
Yeah, what did you make of what Rod Eddington...
The first thing I'd say is that I don't entirely agree with Jamie on what he said. I think actually Sir Richard Branson was very keen to operate Concorde if he could get the cost base right, and I think he was exploring the possibility of getting some other organisation like British Aerospace or Cobham PLC to take over the airworthiness responsibilities for Concorde, and I've reason to believe that there were indications that one or both of those companies were quite interested in doing that, and the block came again from Airbus. So I think Sir Richard was genuinely interested in taking on Concorde as a commercial operation.
What did you make of what Rod Eddington was saying? Did you feel that the door, I mean, it seemed to me he was pretty absolute and definite that for commercial flight, there's nothing.
Well, in about 6 weeks' time, something like that, December the 17th, it's the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers. I mean, it'd be rather fantastic to see Concorde flying down Carolina Beach, wouldn't it?
Do you think it's possible?
Well, he certainly didn't rule it out. He didn't rule out the fact that he was never going to fly again, did he?
No, he certainly didn't.
I think what we've seen today also is a huge difference in contrast between when Concorde entered service, when British Airways was a nationalised company, and now. British Airways has a duty to its shareholders, and of course Rod Eddington is going to say that if for the last year, 18 months, Concorde has been flying with 18 to 20 people, clearly it's not turning in the kind of profits that it should do. Its costs are going up. The maintenance regime means that more costs are going to have to be attributed over the next couple of years. And I think that Rod Eddington himself almost has had to justify to both his own shareholders and the rest of the board that it's the right decision. I believe that if we look at what happens over the next few years, supersonic passenger flight as a scheduled operation is going to stop. What airlines are trying to encourage and to try and use the priority now are to get bigger aircraft like the Airbus A380, double-decker aircraft. They need to get planes that fly longer, that are bigger, that have quieter engines, and that have better fuel efficiency. And that crucially makes those operations cheaper, and I think that's what most airlines are concentrating on. You've got a lot of the world's airlines now joining up with big marketing networks like One World. That's the way they're going. It's not necessarily just going to be operating single fleets.
So John, do you think that anyone is looking seriously at supersonic commercial travel?
Well, Lockheed is certainly looking at designs, aerodynamic designs, to alleviate the effects of the sonic boom. There's definitely work going on in the States in that direction. What they're trying to do is, whereas with Concorde, with its needle-pointed nose, it tends to concentrate the entire overpressure on the nose, what they're trying to do is to diffuse that overpressure along the whole length of the airplane, so reducing the level of the boom to just a sort of dull rumble. Now, if that sort of technology works, and you end up with an airplane that you can fly supersonic over populated land masses, that's the key thing, that then changes the entire dynamics of a supersonic transport operation. And when that day comes, and maybe we're talking about 20 years or maybe 30 years, we're talking about that sort of time frame, I think. When that day comes, and you can fly from London to Sydney or New York to Tokyo in a matter of a few hours, I think the subsonic long-haul world will be left for dead at that point.
Let me bring you the pictures now of the New York flight. I've been kind of looking out of the corner of my eye that they've been arranging for it to come under tow, and they've been attaching various things to it. They've also got their Union flag flying proudly out of the cockpit windows, and I think it will be coming round to the stand any moment now, but I have been saying that for a little while and have been proved wrong every time I've said it, and so I'm hopefully going to be proved right this time, that it will indeed come into view. And that's the New York flight, while the Biscay and Edinburgh flights do a little tour of the airport.
I think I've just realized why that New York flight is not with the other two. It, of course, because it came in from New York, had to go and get clearance from Her Majesty's Customs and Immigration.
Even on special days like this?
Even on a special day like this. So what they've obviously done is taxi to a stand somewhere, or had some special arrangement for that, and shut the engines down, and they're now being towed from wherever they had that immigration and customs check back over here with the passengers still on board. That's what I guess has happened.
Will the pilots have to do any paperwork when they land? Do they have to file any kind of report, debrief, like you would if you were in the RAF, for example, and you've been on a mission?
You have to fill in the aircraft's technical log.
Right,
recording all the defects, if any. I suppose it seems little point in doing that if it's never going to fly again.
But that's the normal routine, is it? You fill in the log?
Yep, that's the normal routine. It's a legal document. And you sign acceptance of the aeroplane when you board the aeroplane to take it somewhere on that tech log, and you hand it over to the next crew by signing it off on arrival.
We've got very little time left now. I just want to ask you to sum up emotion, feeling, response to today, John.
Great sadness, but great pride and a great sense of privilege that I was ever involved in the Concorde operation. I feel enormously privileged to have been part of the Concorde team. It's a great aeroplane. It's without doubt the most magnificent aeroplane I've ever flown, and I've flown well over 70 different types. It's in a class of its own. It's the Epsom Derby winner. It's the thoroughbred of the flying world.
Okay, well, ever since the invention of the wheel, man has striven to travel faster. But today may well be historic as the day we turned the technological clock back. The era of supersonic passenger air travel has come to a close. If you want to travel at twice the speed of sound, well, you'll either have to become a fighter pilot or wait a very long time before we see the like of Concorde again. Goodbye.